Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 11th of September 2024. Of course, it's 9/11, isn't it? I've only just realised that. So, thoughts go out to families of those who passed away in that terrible incident. And of course, all the firefighters who have subsequently suffered and often died as a result of that terrible incident. Right, we'll look at the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course. 1,140 personnel lost is right in the middle of the range that we've seen of late, 1,000 to 1,300 odd. There have been a couple of days of over 1,300 last few days, and that's been significant. Back to 1,140. 2 tanks lost, 13 troop-carrying AFVs, so both of those under the daily average. 56 artillery systems is well above. So what is that? 3 times the daily average. MLRS 2 lost in the last 24 hours. So that is a pretty good haul there. 1 anti-aircraft warfare system. I'd like to see what that might be. 58 vehicles and fuel tanks and 6 pieces of special equipment. So fairly typical day with some categories and lower in some others. Tanks and AFVs we've seen a number of days where they have not been as heavy on those losses. I wonder why that is. Are the Russians not attacking in so many places, or they're attacking in different ways with different approaches, such as maybe not using so many combat assets and doing troop-led, infantry-led assaults instead? I don't know. Andrew Perpetua says, I was barely able to keep up when there were 180 videos per day, and now I'm having like 240 to 250 videos per day, and it's slowly killing me. Someone tell them to stop. As I said, this is a form of saturation bombing to overwhelm OSINT defenses from the front line to the information domain. The tactics are the same. I feel sorry for Andrew because he genuinely has huge numbers of videos to contend with, and he's doing an absolutely magnificent job with his team there, and he certainly struggling of late, as there appeared to be more and more videos posted online by both sides. Now here we have a day of not huge numbers of losses compared to what we have seen previously. Andrew tots up that I guess the Russians have lost a few more, but probably twice the amount of combat assets as the Ukrainians, largely due to artillery being on there and quite a few tanks. So let's look at the Ukrainian losses. We have nothing too significant. A damaged Bradley, a couple of APC losses, Senator damage, and a Titan DS destroyed. A few Kozak 7 Ukrainian MRAPs destroyed as well, but nothing too serious. For the Russian losses, they have a damaged Strela 10, that's a short-range air defense system. Recovery vehicle damage, a TOS-1A thermobaric launcher, that's caught on camera. I've seen that one. I mean, all of these are, that's why they're on the list. But I have seen that TOS-1A get destroyed. That is a good hit for the Ukrainians. A number of D20 and D30 old school towed howitzers. Some tanks here. Quite a few tanks, 7 tanks, 3 abandoned, 2 destroyed, 2 damaged. So pretty good ratio there. A couple of 3 tracked garden sheds. The sort of Mad Max variants where they cover them in corrugated metal or whatever, sheet metal, and use them as glorified troop carriers. Just one truck there, a couple of infantry fighting vehicles, a few ATVs, and a whole bunch of destroyed civilian vehicles there. So nothing crazy for either side. Ukrainians having a slightly better day of it there. War Translated's Dmitry says Russian mobilized servicemen in his blog, so this is a serviceman giving us a blog, speaks of the high risk of grinding down the Russian offensive group in Pokrovsk due to the continuous need to advance, and that the Ukrainian armed forces preserve the ability to seize the initiative. He adds that Russian drone operators are being sent into assaults again. So let's read this. I think this is important. So regarding the offensive actions on our forces in the Pokrovsk direction, so this is one area where Russia are really doing quite well, but at what cost? And the idea is they keep pushing. I've been saying that they've been throwing everything down the kitchen sink at that area because they're desperate for some success before the weather sets in and autumn becomes very boggy and rainy. Pokrovsk is the area that they were having some success, and so didn't draft troops from there to the Kursk front where they are on the defensive. Indeed, they're counter-attacking at the moment. We'll come to that later. But that success has come at a cost, and it is just relentless driving at the Ukrainians, even though they really need to kind of stop, and they must be very close to culminating, and they are throwing in, I think, somewhat underprepared troops, just everything they can, as well as some of their better troops. Regarding the offensive actions of our forces in the Pokrovsk direction, the enemy reports, so this is a Russian saying, the Ukrainian support reports that the situation in the southern part of the enemy's offensive zone, i.e. our forces, in the Pokrovsk direction remains extremely difficult at the moment. And further, so that again, the Ukrainian claim the enemy continues to actively attack and assault, making significant efforts to do this almost continuously and on as many directions and sectors as possible. So that's what he's saying the Ukrainians are saying about them. And then he says at the same time, the enemy, so the Ukrainians, observe a significant reduction in the number of our attacking forces and the amount of armoured equipment involved. Interesting. And we go back to this. Armoured equipment dipping down, and I haven't read this yet, and I was saying I can't really explain why that is, other than they are running short of equipment, they're using other equipment instead, like ATVs, etc., and this is kind of what he says. So reduction in the number of our attacking forces and the amount of armoured equipment involved, from assault companies and battalions supported by dozens of armoured vehicles to assault squads and incomplete platoons with minimal armoured vehicles or none at all. There you have it. What an incredibly significant admission. Now, it's an anecdote. Can we extrapolate that? Is it representative, etc., etc.? The artillery and air assault provided is clearly not sufficient to effectively counter the enemy's entire array of weaponry, despite the enemy's defence collapsing in several sectors. With what seemed to be a successful advance by our forces, the enemy has in turn been quite effective in physically depleting our attacking forces and equipment, even to the point of wearing down assault units, combat personnel and armoured vehicles to nothing. Wow. Thus, the operational success achieved in the Pokrovsk direction risks being nullified by the critical depletion of our offensive group. The issue here is not only the stretched supply lines, which complicate the situation, but are not the decisive factor. In this regard, I will set aside the question of hypothetical flank counterattacks. I will only note the possibility of the fire support of the flanks without necessarily stopping the main offensive thrust. The main problem is the depletion of our group! The desire to ensure a complete collapse of the enemy's defences without regard for our own losses is based on dangerous illusions. If it has been decided to develop this operational success at any cost as a way to prevent a crisis in the Kursk region, then it is a fundamentally bad idea. And this is really important. So I've been saying that the calculation for the Russians is it's more important to grind out successes in Pokrovsk than it is to defend Kursk. They are counterattacking Kursk now. That is happening. So they are looking to take back that territory. But certainly for the last month, it is been deemed more important to make these grinding territorial gains in Pokrovsk and to lose territory in Kursk. The enemy clearly has certain strategic reserves and shows readiness to continue working to seize the initiative. Forces from other operational areas have already been deployed to contain the breakthrough in the Kursk region. Do we have the strength and resources to counter potential new strikes in other directions, including border areas? P.S. Against a backdrop of a brilliant counterattack by our forces, which literally collapsed the western flank of the enemy's group in the Kursk region in just one day, in one of the sectors of the Pokrovsk direction, a regiment that has been completely depleted and is now practically incapable of offensive tasks is hastily pulling drone operators from their duties and sending them into assault infantry. Right, so a couple of things here, and we are going to talk about this in a wee while, but he's claiming that we've had a resounding success in a counterattack on the west of Kursk, but at the same time, our guys are so depleted in Pokrovsk that they're using drone operators to do infantry assault attacks. So, interesting. Now, a pair of Russian school children have torched a Russian Mi-8T transport helicopter at the Novorossiysk airfield in Siberia. The helicopter is a complete loss. The pair reportedly carried out the attack after receiving an offer of 5 million rubles from an unknown figure on Telegram. And the quote is, the claim is here, the fact is that the school children set the helicopter on fire with cigarettes. After they poured the liquid on the helicopter, their boys decided to smoke and then threw a cigarette into the helicopter. There was no fire. Then one of the boys lit a second cigarette and it stuck to the liquid. At that moment, an explosion occurred. During a conversation with law enforcement officers, the school children said that they were promised 5 million rubles for their work. The boys also admitted that several days ago they set fire to a cell phone tower. For this, they received 30,000 rubles. Wow. Okay, if that's true, it doesn't surprise me at all, but it shows that actually the Ukrainians can cause a lot of issue for the Russians with minimal risk and minimal outlay. These are, I mean, here you've got children who are the fall guys for this. Now you can say you can worry about the morality of that to some degree, but in terms of the intention to cause damage without the loss of any Ukrainian lives and for not much cost, relatively speaking, that is a good return on investment. The Ukrainians are suffering because Russians are doing that as well, with getting people in Ukraine to set fire to military vehicles within Ukraine and paying them on the dark web. So that goes both ways. Now, there is an interesting video here of, yeah, of course that was going to happen, of a buggy, as mentioned here, an unarmored buggy that runs into a Ukrainian anti-tank landmine. There is a massive explosion where bits of that fly all over the shop. And you're thinking, they're done for. Apparently, the crew survived. I don't understand how this happens, but it happens way more often than you might think, including with some of the worst armoured vehicles like the BMP-1 compared to the Bradley. Yes, the Bradley it is more survivable. You do survive more often than with BMPs. But still, I've seen BMP-1s explode, and you think, everyone inside is dead. And then you get like 15 people run out of it and thinking, it's just blown up in a fireball. What are you doing running away from that? But it happens. It's incredible. And here, apparently, the crew survived. And that's a golf buggy pretty much blowing up in a major way. Anyway, I thought that was of note. What else do we have? Strike on a Ukrainian bridge over the Tsel River in the village of Velika Chernichichnya in Sumy Oblast. So there are strikes within Sumy. Sumy has taken a few hits. That's the other side of Kursk, and that could be the Russians getting ready for their counteroffensive and also striking logistics targets within Sumy that supply the Ukrainian troops in the Kursk offensive. So they seem to be gathering themselves together now, the Russians, and finally pushing back at the Ukrainians. Now, Timothy Milyovanov says Russian mill bloggers are panicking, reporting that Ukraine's drone innovations, some are so simple yet ingenious, you can't help but think, why didn't I come up with that? Would you? Here's a list. 1. Fast FPV drones paired with slow bombers to protect them from Russian air defense. So in other words, it seems like the Ukrainians are using like a slower, maybe Mavics drone that's dropping some bombs, and then having FPV drones protecting it, maybe even sacrificially from air defenses. So they get taken out, or they take out the air defenses. So operate it maybe in teams of drones. The enemy, Ukraine, so this is a Russian claim, have begun parking their slow agricultural drones known as Baba Yagas with fast FPV drones equipped with night cameras and thermal imagers. The tactic counters the anti-drone defenses set up by our Russian units. Where machine gunners using thermal imagers play a crucial role, now when a team fires at the night bomber, Baba Yaga, capable of carrying up to 40 kilograms of munitions, they are immediately targeted by FPV drones. This kind of goes on top of what was said yesterday, which is in a slightly different context. If a drone gets taken down by Russian infantrymen, maybe with small arms, then other drones swarm around and take out that guy, and then that stops them psychologically wanting to shoot down drones because it's too dangerous for them. They get picked off and hunted down, so they just let the drone go and do their thing without stopping it. Really interesting. Anyway, number 2, dusk drone mining. The enemy, quote, the enemy, so this is another Russian claim, is also actively using drones to mine roads behind our position. Yagas drop standard mines at dusk, relying on drivers not noticing and running over them. So using the poor light to mask mines that they drop over already cleared roads. 3. FPV traps. Quote, Ukrainian FPV drones are used more cunningly. They land near a road and wait for a target. Once a vehicle or group of people enters that field of view, the drone takes off and strikes from ambush. Talked about this before, where you kind of have a drone waiting there, saving battery, not just constantly flying around and not finding a target. It lands and waits for a target to come and then kicks back into action. 4. FPV drones as air defense. So, quote, recently the Ukrainians have gone further. Modified FPV drones are now being deployed to hunt down our reconnaissance drones. And we've seen that a lot. I've shown you lots of footage of this. One video had 49 different ones being taken out. Ukrainian FPV drones have been spotted at altitudes above 1,000, or is that the total number? I don't know if that video did show actually 49, but the claim was, I think, 49 have been taken out. Ukrainian FPV drones have accuracy. It's about accuracy. Have been spotted at altitudes above 1,200 meters, functioning as a constant air defense system. When Russian reconnaissance drones enter their range, they are swiftly shot down. There were also reports of Ukrainian drones attacking Russian helicopters in flight, which we have seen. The effect of these techniques, low cost and asymmetric, is that Russia loses reconnaissance capabilities, making striking capabilities irrelevant. In other words, you can't strike at targets if you don't know the targets are there. But so the reconnaissance, like successful strikes, are contingent upon successful reconnaissance. That's smart. Instead of defending against Russian attacks, make them imprecise and ineffective. Really interesting thread there. Okay, PS01 here says there's a powerful explosion rang out in a blast furnace shop of the Russian metallurgical plant Evraz NTMK, located in Nizhny Tagil in Sverdlovsk region. One worker died and 3 others were injured. The company specializes in producing rolling stocks and train rails. So sabotage, one presumes, or it could be, who knows, it could be a drone strike, but it is aiming at debilitating the Russian logistics through taking out rolling stock, repair and blast furnaces that are working on railway and railway infrastructure. This is incredibly important. They already have an issue with getting decent ball bearings. Since the beginning of the war, Sweden, as one of the biggest ball bearing exporters, stopped through sanctions, stopped helping out Russia. They've had to get cheap ball bearings, I think, from China. It's an issue, right? The rail system is an issue, and that is a very clever bit of sabotage, if that's what it is. And is that the same? I don't know if this is, no, because that's a different place. This is, it looks the same, the flames look the same, but this is St. Petersburg, apparently in Russia. Who knows what was on fire there and when that was. But it is an image that came out from yesterday. So there was that massive Ukrainian strike, and this happened previously on that other massive Ukrainian strike of record numbers of drones hitting. So Russians claim 144 were shot down 2 nights ago, which means likely there were many, many more, and probably weren't 144 shot down. We know very little about what happened. So it could be that Russians were really successful in intercepting the Ukrainian drones. It likely is that they are fairly good. I mean, this is going into places like Moscow that you've got to assume is the best defended place in Russia. So the Ukrainians are going to struggle to have like unanimous success with their drones, but there's also a lot that we just don't know. The Russians may well be pretty good at operational security here. Well, you're not going to see video footage of this from the Ukrainians. These are attack drones without videos on that are just sent and then blow up, and it's up to Russian people to catch that and put that on socials. And if the Russian government and authorities are onto that, then that may not happen as often as we would like in order to get a proper idea of what really happened. Tim White says more strange happenings in Yekaterinburg earlier. An explosion occurred at a construction site or near one, and the police are saying a terrorist threat has been neutralized. 3 cars were damaged in a blast and 1 person injured, but exact details remain scarce. So yeah, a bit of an issue there. Also sabotage on the railways in western Russia last night. An IED exploded, damaging the tracks and causing delays for trains in the Belgorod region. And yeah, so we're going to move on to distant strikes now. In Ukraine, good work from Ukraine's air defenses. Russia launched 25 drones. None hit targets. 20 were shot down. 5 fell due to probably electronic warfare. So 100% interception rate. No missiles were stopped, however. A ballistic, 2 S-300 surface-to-air missile systems, and 6 Kh-31s were fired. The latter used in a Black Sea skirmish. So there were 9 missiles fired. Now, interesting about these 6 Kh-31 missiles fired, there were claims of an attack. I wonder if that's anything to do with this. So, interesting, trying to put 2 and 2 together here. Russian media claim Ukraine launched a daring attack on a platform in the Black Sea overnight, midway between Odessa and occupied Crimea. We have only Russian reports which claim the raid was repelled with around 10 landing craft destroyed. Must have been a big operation. So the Russians making some big claims, no evidence out there yet, but then latter used in Black Sea skirmish, so 6 missiles might well have been used in that attack there. Okay. So, according to Russian media, Murmansk airport has been closed due to a temporary flight restriction caused by the threat of a drone attack. The airport has not accepted flights since 9:30 this morning, with several flights from Arkhangelsk delayed. Now, a reminder that Murmansk is a rather long way away from Ukraine. This is 1,800 kilometers. It's where some of their strategic bombers are kept that release those missiles onto Ukraine. It has been targeted, I think, twice before. Olenia airfield there. The claim is that it is under threat again, or was under threat this morning. I say this morning because usually drones have to travel all the way through the night in order to get there. They do bypass an awful lot of Russian territory in order to get to Murmansk. Now, the claims from the Russians at the moment are that the drones, at least one of the drones came from Norway, is their claim. Have no idea whether that's remotely feasible. But Russia reports shooting down 2 drones there. Nighttime Ukrainian drone attack targeted military unit 61991 and warehouses in a Moscow suburb near Ramanskoye. So this was not last night, but the night before. And the claim was that the warehouse that was struck in Moscow 2 nights ago was one where Fateh 360 ballistic missiles, so the Iranian ballistic missiles recently shipped from Iran, were being stored there, just as supposedly KN-23 North Korean missiles were blown up in Voronezh. The West just wants to impose ridiculous sanctions on Iran. Ukraine destroys the rockets. That's how it works. Says Jürgen. Nailed it there. Now, there were claims from yesterday that Russian forces seem to have targeted Uman airport in Cherkasy Oblast, I think. At around 2:26, firms data detected a strong fire in the area. So the Russians are hitting Ukrainian targets too. Don't forget that. Low resolution Sentinel images show dugouts and tracks on the airport. In my opinion, it's likely some kind of air defense was stationed there. So that happened yesterday. Romania may amend its legislation to allow the downing of drones that enter its airspace. The Senate Defense Committee will meet tomorrow, so I think that's today, in order to discuss this issue. This has been sort of rumbling on with regard to the drones that go over Romanian airspace and may fall on Romania. Some of them have fallen in Romania, and some of them are then circled back into Ukraine. So there have been some calls, because that's NATO territory, essentially. There have been some calls for those drones to be shot down. Right, so I Have a Brain and Use It, a YouTube handle, has written this comment with regard to some of those drones that fly into Ukraine and then seem to turn around and fly back into Belarus or back into Russia and then get lost. He says, "G'day, JP. I would so with respect to the Shaheeds that scare quotes get lost, I would expect that these are the ones that are using Ukrainian SIM cards to navigate inside Ukraine. SIM cards send out regular "Are there any towers near me?" signals to handshake with the tower to take the messages. The cell towers talk to each other and then decide which one will handle the call. Then that tower handshakes with the SIM by sending it a message. "I am tower 12345. You will use me." So it's basically how mobile phones work, right? And they're using, like, there are claims that they've been using like Kyivstar or Ukrainian mobile phone SIMs in order to navigate around Ukraine and then hit their targets. To do this, each tower needs a unique identity code, and normally that code is fixed. So if you know what the code number of each tower is, plus its location, the drone can use this information to work out where it is and navigate to a specific site. So you confuse the drones by changing the codes on the towers so the drone does not know where it is. Then you can go one better. When you get your software polished a bit, you can change the tower ID codes in such a way as to guide the Shaheed away from the target you think it is aiming for and direct it back to Russia or Belarus, or circle around to an open field where you can shoot it down with no collateral damage. This is what I believe is happening in Ukraine, what Ukraine is now doing, he says. Really interesting. I can't tell you whether that's accurate, whether that's what's happening for sure here, but that's a really good explanation of what could be going on there, and I thank you for that. So much so that I'm going to drink from my Ukrainian FU Russian warship mug. Brilliant. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. So, as mentioned, there was supposedly a daring attack on one of these rigs in the middle of the Black Sea. Don't know whether it's at all successful. Russians claiming it was not successful at all, and that they destroyed 10 landing craft. We have other big news this was rumbling on yesterday and last night. I'm going to try and get my mapping done today. There's an awful lot to talk about. I really need to get the mapping done because of this. Russian sources report that the forces have begun a large-scale counteroffensive in the Kursk region from Koronovo south towards Snagost. This is actually where they are claiming to have made, I think, most of the success, but also from Troitskoye towards Gordivka. This is down in the south below the same river. So Yeah, big stuff potentially happening there. The intent of both actions appears to be to prevent the slow Ukrainian advances westwards into the Glushkovsky district south of the same river. So they're trying to stop that whole area being taken by the Ukrainians. That seems quite sensible as far as the counterattack is concerned. Now, a Russian source reports that Ukraine, says PS01, is disrupting the Russian counterattack in Kursk by attacking the flanks across the border. This video also surfaced on the social medias. There are claims that there are also attacks into Belgorod as well. And that could be quite sensible. We'll come to that in a second. Against backdrop of our guys' counterattacks, the enemy is attempting attacks across the border in the Glushkovsky district, so that's beneath the same river. They're reporting from the field that on the section of the border opposite the settlement of Pavlovka in Ukraine, on our side, a Ukrainian trawl is removing the dragon's teeth. The Ukrainian armed forces are clearing the area of mines. They are covered by a tank. Additional equipment is being pulled in. Infantry is dismounting. Information was also received about a large concentration of armoured vehicles, motor vehicles, and enemy personnel in the area of the settlements of Kondratovka and Pavoymaya in the Sumy district. The main battles today should be expected in the Bukovka-Lyubimovka area. A large-scale entry of enemy reserves should also be expected. Okay, so just the way I would understand that is the Russians are attacking from here in that kind of beneath the same river area, and it could be that the Ukrainians are attacking across the border and kind of behind them or flanking those Russian attacks to cause them a bit of a problem. Who knows though? War Translated says, to better understand the final paragraph, since yesterday the Russians have been talking about their counter-offensive operations in the Kursk region launched yesterday that allegedly had some success, particularly around the Snagost area. Deep State also carefully commented on this. Russians are certainly putting out there as a huge victory, but we have to see what happens. And this is replying to himself, who previously said Russian mobilized servicemen in his blog speaks about the high risk of grind. Oh yeah, that was a Procross thing that I talked about earlier. Right, so yeah, so that was that last paragraph I talked to you to, wasn't it? Against a backdrop of a brilliant counterattack by our forces, literally collapsed the western flank of the Russian enemy's group in the Kursk region in just one day. So that claim from this guy is that the Ukrainians have collapsed in the west here as the Russians have counterattacked. We'll have to see. Now, Tim White says there seems to be an active battle taking place on the Belgorod border. So if you go back to here, if you were to go east from here, then you get to Belgorod Oblast. So this is the Kursk Oblast. You get to Belgorod Oblast, and where the Russians are attacking down into Kharkiv Oblast in those two sectors. So somewhere between those sectors and here, you could have a Ukrainian attack. Now, it was Gavin Briley on one of my threads and with Andrew Pepech having this discussion about one option for the Ukrainians could be to attack. Like, they have limited forces, but actually it's kind of, they could do a kind of game of whack-a-mole where they attack up in, I don't know, in the Bryansk Oblast, in the Belgorod Oblast, maybe not with huge offences, but you would then stop the Russians. You'd make the Russians think, oh my goodness, like, we've amassed all our forces to deal with the Ukrainians here in Kursk, but the Ukrainians are now attacking in Belgorod, or they're attacking in Bryansk. So making them pull their forces away or not pull their forces away, then the Ukrainians can take advantage and move quite quickly into these areas, and they can give up Kursk. And so there are all sorts of options for the Ukrainians. It could be what they might be thinking about doing. I don't know. Andrew Perpetua was quite damning of that, saying actually they've got really good defensive positions in Kursk, and they might as well just spend the capital defending Kursk. So it depends. Well, we'll have to see whether there's any evidence for this. But there seems to be an active battle taking place on the Belgorod border, with Russia saying Ukraine's trying to make another incursion. There's no independent confirmation of that, though. And then a resident of the Chernihiv region showed the aftermath of mass fish kill in the river. So this was something that actually has been reported quite a bit over the last day or so. Video shot on September the 8th. So at the end of August, it became known that the Russians had dumped hazardous substance into the same river. So that's the river that goes along. So if you're looking at me, it goes along Kursk Oblast and then heads down into Tekhino, I think it is, and then comes down into Ukraine. And so they're blowing bridges up across the same river. Fighting's going on underneath it at the moment, but also it appears that river has been purposefully poisoned, and that river then drains into the Dnipro River and goes into Kiev and so on and so forth. So at the end of August, it became known that the Russians had dumped hazardous substances into the same river, which runs through the Kursk region and flows into the Ukrainian Desna region, and that flows into the Dnipro River. A poisoning has caused contamination. The stain may reach Kiev, but it's believed to be it's not so concentrated to pose a great threat. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. That seems pretty horrific to me. Now, although this is in the geopolitical realm, and I wouldn't usually include that in this video, today UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy and Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State for the US, are in Kiev. There's a lot of growing talk concerning whether restrictions on striking deep into Russia will be lifted. Here, David Lammy and Antony Blinken, they had a hug, they kissed. They're now an item, which is nice, and they were seen holding hands in Kiev. So that's a beautiful story to behold. On a serious note, this is hopefully really good news where, UK, if the UK can convince the US in some way and with other people to lift those restrictions, and if we can get a really united support for Ukraine back on the cards and a really robust support, then that's awesome, which is really cool. So waiting with bated breath with regard to that one. And finally, do you remember I showed you this the other day? And I said, look, just be careful of Russian bots. Some of them are obvious, some of them are less obvious. Here's an obvious one. Emma Mills says, I am England, all caps, and I am support Russia. 10 out of 10, no notes. Brilliant, well done. Anyway, there were two of you that replied with the same gag yesterday, and I just have to give Mitch Mazerol, he's a total legend. I am Canada, and I am support Ukraine. I genuinely laughed out loud there. And other people might be like not realizing what the gag was, but I absolutely loved it. And by the way, Mitch Mazerol, you wrote me an email and agree 100% with everything you said in that email. So thank you for that. If I don't get a chance to reply to you today, thank you for your opinions and whatnot. Excellent stuff. So yeah, I am Britain, and I am support Ukraine. There you go. Take care, everyone. Speak soon. Toodle pips.